Now sit back and prepare to be entertained.
Greetings and welcome back to the Dripping Bucket Podcast. Today we are joined by Jordan Loyal Short, the author of the Dreadbound Ode series. And we thought we might talk about, fittingly, pulling in historical references and how you do that and where you can go horrendously wrong with it. All sorts of fun shit like that. Yeah. So, Jordan, how you doing, man?
Okay.
I'm doing pretty good. Having a good morning so far. I'm awake. I'm drinking a lot of coffee. Forgive me, guys, if I seem insane because I am a little bit.
I mean, you're like I said, you're right at home here. This is the place to be for unhinged babbling and
other weird people. I feel so much better.
Yeah.
So I guess let's start off. Tell us a little bit about the Dreadbound Ode, the historical influences that sort of inspired it, and then I guess we can wander from there into how you made use of that, what you changed, and
I'm going to segue into. So the Dreadbound Ode is actually my first series, and in a Jordan Short like feat of preparedness. I actually have copies of my book to show.
Yeah,
that's the Dreadbound Ode is my first series. The one that is more has more historical parallels and that sort of thing is actually the new one. This is City in the Dragon's Eye. This is book 1 in Dragonreich, and then the new book, Pages Pyre, is coming out December 3rd. So.
That's perfect because this will air just after that, so it's almost like we know what we're doing. Yeah,
that's a good time.
We planned everything.
So I don't even remember what the question you asked me is, but I can probably just vamp for a couple seconds talking about. So the series is kind of like a retelling of World War II, except for instead of Nazis, here we have dragon Nazis. So it's a lot of fun to kind of play with, first of all, like, you know, the big ideas behind World War II and the big events behind World War II all take place, but it's in a drastically different world. You know, it's kind of like more like an 18th century Prussia or England kind of setting.
Yeah.
It's not completely modern, but it's got all these events that happen that, you know, when they take place in the books, you're kind of like, like, okay, now I see we're doing that thing that happened that one time. Right. And there's these little touchstones that are just kind of moments that playing your memory. And it's almost like there's a shorthand going on in the background.
Yeah.
Where world building, when you are doing something, you know, like the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and you're just creating all these cultures out of thin air that are so complex and unique, and you end up with books that are this big. But then you can also do a book that uses a lot of these familiar things, and you use those as the grist of the background of this world, that all of a sudden you can tell a story that's maybe a little more fast-paced, but still feels like it's taking place in
big fantasy
new world that's cool and exciting.
Yeah. I'm really like. It's probably no surprise that I have a soft spot for fantasy that takes place more recently in our history setting. So you know, that is a great pitch for me, and I'm always really curious. It's unusual. It is an unusual choice in this genre. So what made you choose World War II when that's quite a few hundred years later than most SFF these days?
Yeah, I think theme is definitely a big player in that, you know, and unfortunately real world events, I don't want to get too political on your show. I don't know how you guys feel about stuff, and I don't want to box or do these, but
we're all good.
You know,
go wherever you need to go.
Books, I think, are honestly the political things. If you have opinions about the world and how the world should be, you probably in some regard have political opinions, and mine happen to be that, like fascism is bad and that we're doing stuff that
really
dances with fascism, and we should stop doing those things, and we should look at the bad things that have happened in our past and look at the bad thing, or look at the things at least that are happening in our present, and see, are there connections here? Are there, things that we're reliving that we don't need to relive? So, that really is why I started writing these books. But also I wanted to, we all lived through the 2020 era, and just everything was bad, COVID, and the world felt like it was on fire. Especially if you were an American, the world felt like you're on fire because everything was changing and it was all in a negative way. We also just needed something to fucking laugh at. We needed fuel to keep going through times like that. And part of that is just having, something silly that you can point at and just cackle like a dipshit over. So I also wanted to make people cackle like dipshits.
So you've added some humor in with the heavy fascism, just to
you gotta balance out the mass murder and horrible darkness that people are capable of with, a little lighthearted banter and silliness.
Your previous series was more second world fantasy, more created, just whole cloth, not sort of based on historical aspects. Which do you find sort of ended up being more work, more research?
Ooh,
that is a good question. So the first series that I wrote does have it's like a epic space fantasy, but it does have kind of it's more in the background, but it's got kind of real world culture influences. So I did a Norse, little tidbits of Norse myth, but it's very way in the background. And then one of the other cultures I based on Carthaginian culture, which is interesting because there's not a lot of source material about it, but the little bits that there is kind of did that. So I actually feel like I did more research trying to figure out what the fuck was happening in Carthage than anything else.
Many a history nerd has fallen down that rabbit hole.
Yes, just tearing their hair out, saying, "What the fuck was happening in Carthage?" God. But World War II, I definitely read a little bit and kind of watched documentaries and things like that for mood. But I think World War II, is kind of a shared construct for us now. We have a lot of that in the back of our minds, where certain base elements of it are pretty present in mass media and just the zeitgeist. Everybody's got that in their brain. And me, I have it in my brain too, because I like history. So I've read a lot of books like that in the past. I read Eric Larson wrote a really great book. I don't know if you've ever read Devil in the White City.
That's high on my TBR. I've got a couple of his books. It's a really great book. So he writes nonfiction, but he writes it kind of with letters and real accounts of things, and he kind of weaves them in, so it's almost still makes
a narrative
story.
Nonfiction. Yeah, it feels like a story. So he wrote a really good book about the American ambassador to the Weimar Republic, during the rise of Nazism, and that was.
That must have been a really good source.
Actually, I guess it's not the Weimar Republic after that. That's right before that. So it is part of it. Anyway, it's a really interesting book that kind of is these outsiders' view of Germany circling the toilet. That's really the first two books in Dragonreich are kind of before the war. They're just the villains doing their villainy shit, trying to get set up to take over. So the first book is kind of recovering from the First Great War, and the Thule Society is a real world thing that makes its appearance in this book. So these books, they're not set in Earth, it takes place on the continent, which is a sort of similar thing, but that's one of those elements that is tied in from the real world. So the Thule Society, for anybody who doesn't know about it, was a German occult society that were the progenitors of a lot of those really evil ideas, like blood and soil was one of their things, where they believed that the German people had fought and died over this land, and that there was a mystical element to them, like living and dying on this land, that gave them like a, not a God-given right, but like a magical birthright to own this land. And that kind of idea fueled a lot of, obviously genocidal things that came later, when they felt like they were justified to do anything that they wanted to do. So the Thule Society are kind of like the background, are the villains in Dragonreich, and they have, their own twisted ideas. The main character, Victor, he draws too much magic and he gets a tumor. The magic in this world, when you take a little too much of it, it gives you a tumor, and your tumor is kind of thematically tied to the source of your power. So the Victor draws on the dragon well, so his tumor starts turning him into a dragon. And that catches the eye of the Thule Society, because they're like dragon-blooded dragon supremacists. So they want to recruit him, and they want to do their own dark shit with it, obviously.
You've got kind of a rare skill among writers of like talking about your book very promptly and succinctly and making it sound really interesting, which me and Fletcher are so bad at. So that's a fantastic pitch. It must have been both cathartic and also really heavy to go back and looking at that research and watching, the rise of the fascism in a historical context, and then turning on the news post 2020. And I'm not really surprised that you would want to do that, because I kind of did the same thing, but also man, writers are weird. We really torture ourselves with reality and our books. And I didn't have a question there. It's just related.
You're correct, though. I want to say yes, true, ding, make the ding sound if you can add that in later. We do like to torture ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in real world novels might be the worst for research, because as a complete know-nothing, I have to literally look everything up. Like when I'm writing, I've got a second sort of like browser window open strictly for research, where it's like, oh, how the fuck does that work? What does that do? Like, it's pain in the ass. Whole cloth fantasy. Let me just randomly make shit up that's loosely based on something that might work. Yeah. So how would you say this sort of, what worked the best for you in terms of pulling like historical inspiration, and where did it go horribly fucking wrong?
All right. What worked the best for me? I think there's I can't talk about it too specifically, but there is a scene that happens in the second book, which is about to come out. Page's Pyre. Go buy it right now.
Go buy it.
Page's Pyre. There's a scene in it that is historically inspired, that is actually not an event that happened in World War II, but it is one of those things where I think a lot of people who are not just history buffs, but a lot, anybody who has an education in European history specifically, this moment will happen and it'll like ding in their brains. And it felt really good because it really played off of like the world about to plunge into chaos. It's one of those moments in history where everyone collectively goes, oh shit, that's not good. That's not good. And I got to write one of those scenes, and I felt really like everybody watching this is just like, what does this mean? What's going to happen now? And I think that was really fun, and really felt like a win, which, you got to take those wins when you can.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
As for fucking up probably everything else, I would say.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So how technologically, how much of you said like late 1800s, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
did you keep most of the sort of real world tech from the 1800s to use, or do you pull back on like the firearms and whatnot?
I pulled back on a lot of stuff. The fire, so, and I couldn't map it. I'm also one of those people that I love being a fantasy writer because I don't have to fucking research, like, you know, how many rounds are in a standard AK-47 clip or anything like that. I can just be like, oh, because that's fucking magic, dude. It works, okay? And thankfully I can. I just totally forgot what I'm saying. I'm sorry. I'm sleep deprived. I literally lost.
Yeah, we're talking about technology and what you pulled back on.
Guns,
and,
right? AK-47. So I there are like early firearms in this story. There are dwarves, and dwarves call upon, you know, there's the different wells of magic or the sources of magic. You know, like Victor and the Thule Society both draw magic from the dragon well, but the dwarves draw from the crucible, which is like a well of magic that gives them insight and prowess into creating machines. And so the dwarves are the inventors of the firearms, and they're really rudimentary. Like the book starts, the first day of the first page of the book takes place like on the day the peace treaty, the armistice, is signed from the last Great War. Yeah. And so the dwarves have just like gotten rudimentary firearms into the hands of the combatants, and they're kind of like just only for the elites. But there's also, you know, there's zeppelins going on in the background, but there's no, you know, like I kind of like avoid the plumbing, honestly. I haven't had a toilet scene yet. I talk about them pumping water. So maybe I'll have to write a toilet scene into the third book. So
I find I have to research medieval plumbing, aqueducts, and shit like that, like once per book. Because by the time I write the next book, I've completely forgotten whatever I learned. It's like there's this insane amount of information that's completely inaccessible in my brain because I read it, learned it, forgot it. And if second I wrote the sentence.
If you're like me, you're going to be completely convinced that you'll remember it next time, and then it just sails off into the void forever.
Mm-hmm. I think there was an editing note on Ash and Stone where my editor, or no, Brick and Bone, where my editor said, like, we're finding out a lot about David Kane's plumbing because he's like retrofitting it on the building because it's Victorian era, and she's like, I feel like maybe you're going through something in your personal life with your own plumbing and it's bleeding out into your book. So we actually don't need to know this much about retrofitting plumbing on turn of the century buildings. And it's like, okay, all right, fair note, that's fine. So the plumbing hits me in a very personal space.
You just had to justify why you had Googled crapper so many times. So you have to come up with a reason.
No, actually, it's because all of our plumbing was frozen and we were living without plumbing for like 2 weeks. So it was literally just on. Yeah, it was just
like a delight
on my mind. Oh, yeah, it was great. It was fantastic. And so that's, you know, that's a very small example of that balance between catharsis and self-torture. Because I would, you know, try to ignore all of my problems by going to write, but then now Davik's inherited all of my plumbing problems, and he'll have to deal with frozen pipes on his building. Goddamn it! The frozen pipes did not make it into Brick and Bone. There were more important things going on.
All right, what else we got?
Well, I was just thinking that what you said earlier on near the top about learning from history. I just finished a nonfiction book called Dominion. It's the history of the Canadian Railway in about 1860 to 1890. And it was again cathartic and also fucking bleak, man, because some of the things that the historian commented on about, you know, the mindset of Canadians back then was like, that's not changed very much. And so it's been an interesting thing to grapple with, since I write in the same setting. Just kind of how much of that do you pull in and how hard do you push? And then, but also, where do you decide that you're kind of tired of talking about the heavy stuff and add in the comedy, and the lightness? And I'm curious for you, if that comedy that you talked about, is that something you also pulled in from accounts during your research, or is that a little bit more personal for you?
No, I think it's really, I think the comedy mostly flows from the characters, and they're all like, the three main characters are just kind of lovable dipshits.
Yeah.
And they have very funny foibles, and their particular chemistry is more what fuels that,
right.
than like, watching interviews with people or pulling from things that actually happened. I think that the humor, I don't know. I don't think that there's any really spots where it pulls from the historical kind of stuff.
No, that makes sense though. Because the characters,
it is really fun to like go into moments and have like, ha 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 ha, this is all great, this is funny, oh, like these guys are so silly, like I love these guys, they're such messes, and then all of a sudden, you have a moment where you're like, oh yeah, like, oh shit, oh, that's
reality kind of pulls the rug out from under them.
I think that makes the flow of the story more dynamic when you can have a moment where you're just like, oh my fucking god, they did not say that, and then like 2 seconds later you're like, oh, like that one, I don't like that. That's not good. And then you're like, oh, that's sad, or that's heavy, or that's brutal. Even sometimes, the comedy is definitely kind of dark comedy. And it's not necessarily, it's funny to say that, because when I think of the jokes are really pretty lighthearted, but the stuff that's going on all around the jokes, is a bit darker, and that's what makes it, I think, overall feel kind of like black comedy.
Yeah, the rise of fascism will give that tone.
Kind of a downer. You guys have the sad trombone sound effect that you can just put over this.
Yeah.
Yeah, comedy's intentional comedy.
Yeah,
it's freaking difficult. For me, I find it either just happens. Like the characters do it. I never plan. I'm never thinking, oh, it's time to be funny here. How do I make this amusing? It's like, it just happens, and the characters say something funny, and you're like, oh shit, that dude's witty. Sure as fuck isn't me.
Yeah, he's
and you just keep going.
It's funny. There were a few spots as I've been writing the first couple of books where I could actually did that, where I could say to myself, like, it feels like this is a spot for comedic timing. So I actually put like brackets in the story, and I was like, say somebody does something funny or silly, or like this makes a joke about this here or something like that, and I'll come back to it, because I can feel like this is like the moment where you can ha 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 ha, and then you're like, oh great, fuck dragons, now we gotta fight or whatever. And then right after that, and it just feels like the spot, like, whereas there's the shatter pause before everything goes crazy, and you can say something that'll make everybody get a chuckle and then move on. It's fun to do that. Sometimes there was one spot where I just kept circling back to it, and I was just like, I know I can get something in here. I know I can get something in here. And I just was like, I can't find it. And then finally it came.
Yeah, it's funny how that stuff, for me, I find it happens once I stop trying. Yeah. When I finally just give up and accept that I can't write whatever the fuck it is I'm supposed to write. The moment I'm like, yeah, fuck it, I'm just going to move on. It's like, oh, here it is. All right.
If I only had stopped flagellating myself sooner, I might have discovered this.
Yeah. Could have written this days ago if I'd stopped trying so fucking hard.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a skill that you pick up after a couple of books, where it's just like, yeah, it's going to be shit, it's fine. And then by letting it be shit, it's actually better than it would have been.
I think, honestly, that's like one of the best writing advice tidbits that I have ever gotten, is just, you don't have to make everything perfect as you're going. If there's something you don't know what to do, or something that you're having trouble with, just block it out and say, like, this thing happens here, and move on and keep doing the thing and then come back. I personally had so many starts and stops trying to write novels for years and years and years, and I would get 50 or 100 pages into it, and there would be some problem that I couldn't resolve, and it wasn't really until I finally said, like, I don't know what the fuck to do there, and then like kept moving on, and then a couple chapters later I'd be like, oh yeah, that's easy, just like you said. Michael.
I think I hear that from so many published writers, where it's like a rite of passage that we have to go through, where when we start out, we look at all these books that we admire so much, and we seem to think that they just appeared out of the ether, and we can do the same thing, just pull books out of our butts, and they're good right away. And then at some point, we just give up. We give up the hope, and that act of surrendering unlocks the ability to think more critically and think more reasonably about our skills, and then just plow through it.
Yeah, I think that's a big one too. I'm sure that the first 10 novels I tried to write in my lifetime, I wanted to write like the greatest novel ever written by a human being, that everyone would just be like, lay down and start weeping and laughing at the same time, hoist me up on their shoulders and carry me around the city. Then I realized maybe that could be like your 6th book.
Oh yeah, back when I was young and I had confidence, I sent like a first draft to who was it? It was either Tor or it was Daw had like an open submission, an unagented slot. Back in the day of the self-addressed stamped envelope, I sent them my really pathetic little first draft. I think I was like 19, and I was so convinced that I was about to be a big time author, and womp womp.
Ah, sweet summer child.
Yeah. Didn't quite happen that way. I got my little envelope back with sorry. No.
One word. No.
Yeah, pretty much. They were very polite, but
that's nice. I like the please don't send us your next book.
Please don't bother. It's okay. We're auto rejecting you.
You are irredeemable and without potential. Just give up. Like, no.
And that's why you're still writing, right, Fletcher?
That is, I'm just stubborn fucker.
Yeah.
Too damn dumb to quit.
You gotta be a stubborn fucker if you want to make it in this business, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And on that note, that tidbit of wisdom, it seems like a lovely spot to wrap it up. Be stubborn and keep writing, because why not? What else? What the fuck else are you going to do with your life?
Keep beating yourself. That's all we're going to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jordan, for coming to chat with us. And if you have time, we'll keep you for a second episode in a second.
I love that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, man.
Bye, guys. See you in maybe a week.